Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for taking out the time to join our webinar today. Like we all know, the topic before us today is building end-to-end fraud protection across the customer journey. And we'll be looking at this from the Paygilant perspective. We'll be looking at how Paygilant can help us manage fraud end-to-end across all channels and all customer journey and scenario. In introduction, I would like to start with the host and the organizer for the webinar. Dennis Basharon is our marketing manager and is the host for the event. And I have his colleague on the call, Jeffrey, is also a member of the marketing team. And also, I have Adeola Akeem on the call. Adeola Akeem is our territory pre-sales engineer and is the product champion for Paygilant, which is obviously our fraud management solution here. Adeola Akeem will also be handling the Q&A session, which is the question and answer session. Also, we have our OEM representative for Africa on the call, Jon Hamlet. Jon is the Vice President for Sales for CyberSoc, and he will be the key presenter for the webinar session. Finally, I have myself, Toheeb Mohammed. I manage the sales operations for FPG. FPG, we are system integrators and we partners with innovative OEM around the world in order to bring, to help solve our local challenge. And if you look at the industry today, we are talking about fraud management. How do we manage fraud, especially focusing on financial service industry and our fintech. Okay, but to summarize the current challenges around fraud management or fraud monitoring within the industry, we've seen a lot of challenges lately, especially around the AI-driven and deep fake fraud. I believe Jon will go into details to talk about some of those areas and how Paygilant is able to help us address some of those challenges. The other core challenge in the industry is the real-time payment exploitation that currently happens across all channels today. The third point is synthetic identity, where you have a fraudulent customer coming on board as in registering as if they are genuine customers. Okay, and the last one is fragmented detection system in our financial service industry today. A lot of the detection systems are fragmented. You know, they don't speak to each other. They are not integrated. And that's one of the value that Paygilant is bringing on board today. And finally, a lot of digital asset laundering, including crypto. These are some of the areas that I will be discussing today. And Paygilant, we are going to demonstrate how Paygilant is able to help us address a lot of all these issues and more within the webinar session today. So I'll hand over to Jon to get this started. Jon, over to you to discuss building the end-to-end fraud protection across the customer journey. Over to you, Jon. Thank you.
Thank you, Toheeb. I appreciate the invitation to present and to discuss this extremely one hot topic and very valid topic to every single person that's not only on this call but across the world. So just in terms of the format that I'll be presenting a PowerPoint presentation. It is going to form, let's call it, the challenges, issues, who Paygilant is, for example, how it does what it does. And then I'm going to describe a couple of, I think, three various different fraud scenarios and how this would impact specifically on customers, end users, what that customer journey is, for example, and then a little bit later on, if we've got time, I'll go through the Paygilant, what we call the PFMA, the Paygilant Fraud Management Application, which is the portal. I would request that if you do have any questions, that those questions are sent either to the presenters or we wait until afterwards. So write them down and I'll be able to answer hopefully the majority of them, if not all, and take it from there. Okay. Right, so let me just engage this quickly. 1 second.
Thank you, John. While you are getting the presentation up, I'll advise that all questions can go onto the chat, and Adeola Akeem will coordinate the question and answer session, and we'll be able to read out a lot of all those questions. So I think that's the way we'll go about it. Thank you.
Sure. Right. So firstly, let's just give a very quick discussion about who Paygilant is. Paygilant was incorporated in 2015. It is the company as well as the product. It's a frictionless fraud management prevention for banks, payment providers, fintechs, selcos. There's a number of industries that it can integrate into. Essentially, anything that is doing payments via an application or a digital channel, they'll be able to provide fraud prevention for. There's a significant number of customers in Nigeria, from banks to fintechs, some of which we cannot display. They're not necessarily live with any channels, and some that have just come on board. But the enterprise fraud management space is becoming very, let's call it, crowded. And the reason that it's becoming crowded is that there are quite a number of legacy solutions that are still being sold and used today. And there are some more, let's call it, next generation solutions that are being provided, but they differ based on the capability and, more importantly, the consistency of their scoring capability, right? And that translates to confidence. So if you don't have confidence in your data coming in, you can't have confidence in your data coming out and which your decision is being based on. Paygilant has numerous citations and awards across the industry that we don't need to get into right now, but happy to discuss at a later stage. So how does it work? How does it orchestrate fraud within the bank's ecosystem? Essentially, Paygilant will generate, and this is a big differentiator, it will generate a portion of its own data that it will use across the various different digital channels, and will combine that together with information received from, for example, in this case, a bank, from their core banking application, across all of their channels, whether those have front-end integration using an SDK, with a back-end API on the server side, combining things like KYC information, AML information, information received during onboarding, whether you're doing due diligence, if there's risk factors enhanced over there or not. And it'll do this, again, omni-channel for any type of transaction type. Now, Paygilant has 6 intelligence sets, which you'll see there in detail: device DNA, user space, the activity map, biomarkers, app insights, and the transaction view. And it will combine these 6 intelligence sets, whatever data is active, to activate those models, the AI models, and it will take into consideration your custom rule set that you define, as well as their base rule set that they have. And they will give a weighting per rule and a weighting per engine, and come out with a cumulative or composite scoring, which is you can then base your decision on. Okay, so Paygilant is not a inline system that will block or hold or whatever on your behalf. It will take information from you, analyze that information in real time. Often, we're looking at around, including transmission delay, 150 milliseconds, and they guarantee below 400 milliseconds. And they will return that composite risk score and any recommended actions to be taken in a JSON XML-based response via the API. So what does it cover? And I think that this is something that I'll go into a little bit more detail, considerations, but it covers many different types of fraud. from new account fraud, synthetic identity fraud, internal fraud, your SIM swap and cloning, APP fraud, etc. Many cases, right? So long as the organizations that implement it have the capability to automate and let's say secondary systems to use, you can significantly reduce your attack surface scenario or attack surface, not only of the bank, but also of the bank's customers specifically. And so, fraud is really advancing at wire speed. There are literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different fraud MOs and scenarios. One thing is absolutely key is that digital trust does not equal real trust. I mean, if we look at, social media, if you just look at X, for example, there's thousands of videos being uploaded every single day. A lot of those are now AI generated. AI is available to just about anyone that has an internet connection and an email address. A lot of the time, these platforms are providing access to these, to analytics, to generative capabilities or agentic capabilities, at no cost. And they might limit you in terms of the amount of credits, but it doesn't take a lot to create an enhanced prompt and to get a video created that looks very, very lifelike in order to use that in social engineering or to try and con someone or defraud someone or many people for that matter, right? The use of platforms for gaining inherited trust is a very frequent tactic being used. So, for example, the Meta platform, Facebook, as an example, fraudsters might use a promotion, a competition to state that one of these supermarkets is giving away a vehicle, or they're giving away some some appliance. And all that you have to do is join the group and click on the link and, give your details, or, purchase an item from, this discounted shopping list with 80% discount, and you stand a chance to win a car. And they do this through Facebook as an example. And all of the links that are coming through that are Facebook links, right? So they're using the digital capability of the platform to inherit trust for the users of that platform in order to scam people out of their money, right? So you might pay for a very nice kettle that is now discounted. You never receive your kettle. In fact, the payment gateway that they are linking to from there, they control, and so they get your credit card details, and they very, very quickly empty that account. As an example. Now, on the back end, the banks also need to be able to protect their customers from, and that is called wire fraud, by the way. It's the use of any open network, open communications network or platform in order to defraud or scam or con people accordingly, right? It's not necessarily something that the bank is in control of. They don't control the Meta platform and Facebook and Instagram, WhatsApp, and all of these that form part of it as the example, but they need to be able to identify the payment gateway that is transaction is coming from, the merchant category code that is coming from, be able to identify whether the amount of money for the products that is being sold into there is something that is valid. Is there somewhere that this person, their customer, has purchased from before? Is it the correct amount of time? What is the country environment, the user agent data, etc. So there's a long list of technical information in the back end that the banks can use in order to try and define whether that is fraudulent. But what's really happening is that the customer is the target, and the payout is the objective. And there are many creative ways to exploit the customer. Primarily that is a mixture of things like social engineering and or cybersecurity in order to perpetrate fraud, right? And there are some examples that I'll go through just now, where we will talk about, let's say, account takeover because someone's been phished, their banking credentials have been stolen, for example, or you're sitting in a takeout restaurant, there's free Wi-Fi, you're on the Wi-Fi, you're doing a banking transaction, for example, because maybe you're paying someone through a payment provider like M-Pesa, mobile money, and you need to log into your credentials, but they're holding the SSID, the Wi-Fi, let's call it network. Maybe they've set up one to do interception, etc. But we'll go through that just now. So here's the thing: is syndicates are very well funded. They're very well rehearsed. They've got standard operating procedures. I saw a video on X just yesterday where Interpol in Europe did a takedown of what they call a syndicate, right? Which is an organization that has a location, and in that location, they've got multiple very high-end systems running thousands and thousands of virtual mobile phones with SIM cards, right? And thousands of SIM cards plugged in at the same time, and they are sending out SMSs. They are, pretending to be OTP providers, for example, or they are using these SIM cards and associated numbers for back-end providers via a network to say we're going to connect a virtual machine with a virtual browser to the SIM card, which is on this specific network in this location, and everything is routed then through that, and it's identified. So SIM cloning and SIM swapping is now digital. Doesn't necessarily have to be physical. There's a lot of collusion in telcos to provide that type of information and data and service. Again, very well funded, very well rehearsed. The other thing is that liability is generally passed down to the customer. It's different from country to country, and globally, all organizations, banks specifically, need to be able to reduce their liability. And so for a lot of the time, if you've lost your credentials, for example, or you've been taken for a ride, scammed out of something, you're not necessarily going to have protection from your financial institution. Okay, you need to be able to defend your actions for the most part. Now, culturally, that may change. Okay, so Nigeria, for example, would have a very different way of approaching some things. You've got things like BVN, which is nowhere else in the world do they have, let's call it a banking verification number, right? That I'm aware of, at least. Nowhere in Africa, for sure. And so, the way that you protect, the way that you transact, is very different to other places. And the systems that you put in place, the fraud systems, for example, that you put in place, need to be able to take all of these various different data parameters into account in order to detect and prevent fraud, and obviously protect the customers and the bank at the same time. So all of these peculiarities definitely have an impact on the ability to detect and defend. So, Paygilant comes with complete and actionable intelligence system, but it is reliant on not just the data that the bank provides. If you look at legacy systems, for example, legacy systems were essentially transaction monitoring and looking at patterns within those transactions per customer, creating a profile, which is generally just a private profile just for that customer. And they weren't necessarily looking at, for example, customer A's card transactions with the same merchant code versus customer B's card transactions with the same merchant code, and identifying if the same product was paid with a similar type of amount from the same type of location, etc. So, Paygilant combines the data sets that it generates through its own 6 intelligence sets, for example, your device DNA, your user space, the activity map, the biomarkers, the app insights, all generate their own data set. Combine that together with the customer's data set, meaning the bank's data set, in their CIF file, customer information file from the core banking system, aligned with the data that's available within the actual channel itself. And they enrich that, right, with data that they generate themselves. Now, it's metadata for the most part. They don't necessarily just create a private profile per customer within the bank. They will create a public profile. So how does that customer relate to everyone else within the bank that is doing transactions, location, time, etc., date, whatever it might be, and looking again at behavior. So it's individual behavior, individual biomarkers, and then public at the same time. And here's the key thing. And I think anyone that's implemented a fraud solution, at least in the last 20 years, will tell you that the technology is not infallible. Number one, as I stated earlier, if you don't have the correct level of data coming in and the confidence on that data, you're not utilizing it correctly, creating your correct level of rules that are specific to your organization, and making sure that the models are fine-tuned at the same time, then you're going to have a much worse outcome. Regardless of whether it's an AI-based system or a legacy-based system, doesn't make a difference. And this is where Paygilant do again differ. They don't just offer a technology, they offer a fully managed service. That managed service means that their fraud and risk experts will use human intelligence and combine themselves together with the customer, meaning the bank, put in a set of rules, tweak the AI models, for example, to continuously ensure a high level of confidence on that data, so that the scoring can actually be utilized in an automated fashion, right? Meaning if you get a very high risk score, you should be blocking that as an automated action. You get a medium type risk score, challenge it. Challenge it with something like facial recognition, challenge it with an OTP, challenge it with a combination array of those types of challenges. Get that information back in, reanalyze the entire event and session together with that to identify that it is actually the correct person, which, by the way, also stops things like first-party fraud, or at least gives recourse to the bank for first-party fraud. And making sure that you're engaging in those best practices and fraud expertise means that you're not relying just on technology. Because if you don't monitor, manage, and mature technology implementation, it is going to let you down. And that's true for fraud, as it is with AML, as it is with just about any type of system in, for example, cybersecurity. If you don't update your firewall rules, for example, then things are going to break. So the way that Paygilant uses its agentic fraud prevention tool set, the 6 intelligence sets, any type of data coming through your internal channels, your external digital channels, for example, all of that goes through to Paygilant through a backend API. There is a global fraud intelligence network that gets queried as well. For example, devices, IPs, bank accounts that may have been identified as mule accounts, or accounts used for fast liquidation, or whatever it is. And that information, again, is combine the AI models with the rules, the policy rules, whether they're static or dynamic from the customer, combine that through, provide a response, and then take action on it. So the title of this was about the customer's journey. Okay, so if we talk about a customer's journey, in this case, I'm going to use a mobile banking channel, a mobile banking application of a bank to illustrate the way that Paygilant would generate information, generate metadata, and at which points it can protect. And then I'm going to talk about the use of each one of these 6 intelligence sets and the combination of information through this customer's journey and how Paygilant, for example, would be taken into action for 3 different fraud MOs. So firstly, we need to talk a little bit about the architecture. Sorry, and I forgot to put the architecture in previously, but if we talk about the architecture at a very high level and very quickly, everything in gray is, for example, the bank. Everything in green is Paygilant. But if you've got client-facing channels, so internet banking, whether that's corporate internet banking, personal or retail internet banking, or whether it is mobile banking, with an application, again, personal or corporate, or whether you've got a mobile wallet or whatever it might be, so long as there's an application for an SDK to be integrated into, then we call that a device-related channel or a front-end channel, right? Then you've got back-end channels where there is no device that the customer is using, particularly where you can that holds an application that you can do an integration directly with. So things like ATMs, any of the card channels. So utilizing an ATM with a card, utilizing e-commerce sites, for example, with a card, so card not present, or a POS where there is a card present, for example, or using USSD as another part of the mobile channel group. These are what we call server-side channels, okay? Because there's no device that you can actually put an SDK into. Those will come through to either let me just get a pointer up here. The actual, application servers. So in this case, web application server for your CIB and RIB channels, card channels, card, FEP, USSD server, for example. These can be either of them or any of those, or mobile banking application, right? So Paygilant has a additional API that links into the back end. This is a RESTful API. And essentially it's a query mechanism that sends the data to Paygilant for analysis and then comes back with a risk score and associated actions. Okay, so that's the architecture at a very high level. So if we talk about the customer journey, then I'm going to talk about the mobile application or mobile banking application in this case. Paygilant will initiate the session ID on the application being launched. So if I'm launching from my smartphone, my mobile banking app, and that SDK is going to be initiated, it's going to request a session ID from Paygilant, and it's then going to generate a series of metadata. The 2 primary ones that you're going to see are the device DNA and the user space. Now these are initiated and generate the metadata within seconds. It compresses that information, encrypts it as an encrypted engram, which is then signed with the certificate of that unique device, and it is sent directly to Paygilant even before authentication happens. Okay, so we now understand the environment that specific user, that we haven't identified if they're fraudulent or not, we understand the environment that they are connecting from. Okay, now having an agent-based or an SDK-based system to asynchronously be able to pick up that information is very, very key, because prior to you creating an authenticated session, right, you're able to differentiate between someone, and this I'll talk about in one of the scenarios just now, you're able to differentiate between an alternate system that might be sharing the same session ID. Okay, so if someone does a man-in-the-middle attack, then how do you differentiate between a mobile channel and an emulated device, a mobile device and an emulated device sharing the same session ID prior to authentication happening? Now, whether the authentication is then stolen from the original device, the real user's device, and the session is hijacked and they start injecting transactions into that stream using something like Burpseed, in combination with like a mobile emulator. You need to be able to differentiate that on the front end and be able to differentiate it on the back end. So what Paygilant is doing is really connecting a human to a device, to a service, to a session, to any single risk action that is taken, or what we call a checkpoint, whether that is a financial transaction or a non-financial transaction, and it's being able to validate all of that in real time, okay, in milliseconds. So Paygilant will generate the device DNA information and the user space information for the first time on the application launch. Now, what is device DNA, right? So device DNA, if we think about these 6 intelligence sets as stacks of cards, and each one of these 6 intelligence sets is, let's say, a suite of cards. In this case, we've got 6, right? So device DNA is going to be a series of data parameters that are collected, right, and combined and sent to Paygilant for pre-analysis. Now, this mobile phone, for example, I know I've got a background on, but you should be able to see it here. This device is not unique. It's not unique because it's a Samsung, it's an S24 Ultra, and I think it's got 256 gigabytes in it. There are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of these devices globally that people have purchased. So the make, model, and maybe its initiation or manufacturing date is not unique. But what is unique about this is the fact that, let's say, the device itself has a GPS transmitter or transceiver, I should say. That GPS transceiver has a unique serial number, globally unique serial number. If I combine that with, make, model, and manufacture date, for example, that becomes unique, but it's not that unique, right? If you've only got 1 out of 5 data parameters, it's not really unique. What you want is a string of data parameters that can convincingly say, with no repudiation, that globally that device is unique, whether it's an emulator, physical device or not. So now we add things like IMEI numbers on here, right? This one can take 4, 2 physical SIMs, 2 eSIMs. Each one of those IMEIs is globally unique. So now we've got maybe 5 non-unique parameters and 5 unique parameters that we are combining together, right, in a single device in milliseconds. To be able to simulate that same type of device information is extremely difficult for any type of attacker, unless they've got the physical device themselves, at which stage the real customer would not be using it. Okay. If we then add additional factors into that, which we call the user space, like your contacts, right? My contacts are my own. They may be similar to someone else's, but not statistically enough. We may share, let's say, 100 between myself and Toheeb. We may share 100 contacts, but I might have 5,000 contacts. In fact, I've actually got over 22,000 contacts on my device. So the 100 contacts that I share with Toheeb, who might be the fraudster in this case, do not make any difference whatsoever. They're not statistically the same. If I now combine my contact information that's on there and my Wi-Fi networks that I've connected to in the last year, as an example, all the SSIDs, BSSIDs, what IP address I'm currently using, my carrier grade IP address that I'm using, my location that I'm using, the number and name and installation date and size of the applications I have installed on my phone, that all makes this device unique to me. Okay, the fact that I've logged in, for example, with my Google account, again, makes it unique to me. So combining the physical device information and data that is unique, right, globally unique, combined with the user space, right, now we're stacking hundreds and hundreds of data parameters in real time on top of each other in one suite. Then we've got hundreds and hundreds of other data parameters that we're stacking on top of that. And this, by the way, is just while I've launched the application. I've clicked on the button to launch the mobile banking app, right? So now we are able to definitively say whether that device is unique and whether we've seen it before. Since there's an SDK embedded into the mobile banking applications, well, into the mobile banking application itself, that has a unique serial number, unique implementation date on that device, for example, and unique certificate. We're able to identify that device and a session ID that Paygilant will generate together and send to the bank through that session creation. The next thing that we have is the login and onboarding. Okay, so either you're doing onboarding or you're doing login. In this case, we're going to say login. This customer's already enrolled onto that channel, and they want to do a transaction. So in this case, it's login. Now we start getting the next two intelligence sets. The first one is the activity map. The activity map, device DNA, user space, biomarkers, etc., throughout the session are called multiple times by Paygilant. Okay, through the SDK and the backend communication with the server API. But the activity map is, how does the customer actually use the application? So if you think about a mind map of what functions are available within the mobile application, on the first screen, you've got a split, right? You can either sign in or log in, or you can go through the onboarding process, right? So those are two very divergent parts. Once you've logged in, you then have multiple capabilities of what you want to do. Add a beneficiary, look at your history of your accounts and transactions, and this again will be different for retail and corporate internet banking as an example, or corporate mobile banking, retail mobile banking, whatever it might be, whichever the app is, okay? You may be able to go in and make payments. You can make payments, let's say, 6 different ways. We are creatures of habit. And generally, we can create behavioral, or we can recognize behavior of a human without knowing that it's Toheeb or Jon. We can differentiate based on our behavior. So I might, for example, log in, and even though I've got 5 ways of paying someone, maybe I always go and add a beneficiary, right? Because I want to be able to retain that history for the next, let's say, year. Okay, of how many times I've paid that person, when I've paid them, etc. Maybe they're a family member. So out of 5 ways of paying, we may do 1 or 2, maybe 3. But every single way that we do that then becomes a biometric or biomarker related query. So I may spend, for example, 10 seconds looking at my bank accounts. I may spend 15 seconds or 20 seconds adding a beneficiary, right? And the flow through that application and what I'm doing, both non-financial actions and financial actions, becomes a behavior. And that is the activity map. Now we combine that together, as you can see, they're both the same color, together with the biomarkers. Biomarkers is not biometric recognition, okay? Or validation or verification for that matter. So it's not a retinal scan or a fingerprint scan or a facial scan, facial recognition. Biomarkers are what makes me me from a biometric perspective. So I'm 6 foot tall, my eyes are getting a little bit worse. So when I'm holding my mobile phone, for example, I hold it out a little bit further, whereas maybe 5 years ago, I could hold it here and still have perfect vision, okay? And because I'm used to typing with 2 fingers and I stick my hands behind there and I hold the phone nice and securely, I'm going to be typing with a different part of my thumb. I don't use my index finger, and the part of my thumb that I'm using and where I'm pushing on the screen are all become profile-based, okay? So if you are continuously striking the keypad with the similar type of pressure that you used to in the last transaction that you're doing, we're able to identify that it's the same person. Okay, and it is impossible for anyone else to be able to emulate that, especially not in real time. So now we've got 4 intelligence sets that we are stacking, hundreds and hundreds of pieces of parameters coming into play, again, in milliseconds that are being analyzed. Okay, so the third part of the customer journey, as we are logging in, we're launching the app, we're logging in. Now I'm going through and let's say I'm adding a beneficiary, or I'm making a limit change, or I am drawing a report on my previous transactions, or I'm changing my contact details or my information, something along those lines. All of those are non-financial transactions. Okay, this is prior to us actually making a payment. We're able to then also start adding things to identify whether it is the correct user with the correct device, the correct location, and everything else behind that, right? So it's not just about the transaction view. If you're only looking at the transaction view, you're discarding a good 80% of the capability that you may have to identify whether something is fraudulent or not fraudulent. Okay, so in this case, we've made a limit change. Maybe someone will do that, very infrequently. They may do it at the end of the month when they're making payments for their mortgage or their insurances or their car, whatever it might be. Okay, generally they're going to be doing this from similar types of locations, office, home. They're not going to be making major payments from the road for the most part, although that can change from person to person. High net worth individuals may be making payments at 11 p.m. at night, from the car in downtown Lekki as an example, right? And they may have done that before because their office is around the corner, versus someone else that is maybe not a high net worth individual. They're not going to be doing that at home because they've got to get up at 3 or 4 in the morning, right? So they may be doing it much earlier in the day. But time of transaction, day of transaction, week of transaction of that month, etc., all comes into play. And then you've got the transaction checkout. And the transaction checkout is where you're making some sort of monetary payment, a financial transaction. Yes, Toheeb.
Oh, sorry to cut you. Just to let the audience know that we have opened the chat for questions. So we'll take the questions once we round up. And John, you can kindly round up and perhaps just have 5 minutes to show the maybe the dashboard. So guys, we'll be able to take questions going forward. Put it on the chat, and Adeola will take it from there. Thank you.
Okay. I think what I want to do is just to wrap up with, let's say, 1 or 2 of these case studies. Okay. Let's say, for example, we've got a fraudster who uses social engineering to capture credentials, let's say a phishing attack, and maybe they've got someone that is colluding with them at a merchant stand to do a SIM swap or a SIM clone. Right, so we would call this ATO, or account takeover, with a SIM swap. And what they're doing is they are then initiating transactions to multiple mule accounts or other accounts that they own, for example, and or altering the user's personal information. So we've seen examples of, let's say bank employees committing internal fraud, changing phone numbers to, fraudster's number on valid accounts only for a certain period of time that the fraud is perpetrated, for example, so that the OTP goes to the fraudster's phone, right? And they, let's say they've already got their account credentials through phishing. So how would Paygilant stop this as an example? Well, even if I have credentials for Toheeb, right, his credentials, and I've got the same SIM card, I'm still able to differentiate because Toheeb's phone or the device that he's using, let's say it's a non-physical device, it's an emulator, is not going to have my user space. It's not going to have the same device DNA. There's going to be a major discrepancy from a statistical perspective between that device and the device that I normally use. Now, that also means that you're going to have mismatching biometrics or biomarkers. So the behavioral aspect in terms of the biomarker, plus, for example, you may have facial recognition enabled. And if you do have that, you're going to have that statistical differentiation, and you're going to have an incorrect sequence flow, meaning the app insights from I think that's the 3rd intelligence set. And again, from a transaction perspective, you're going to have a different behavioral anomaly. Meaning you're not going to see that same device from a different location. For example, let's say it's the same mobile number from a different device, which is using machine swipes, for example, no biometric information that is a thumb being pushed on a physical device that gets transmitted and picked up by the SDK and transmitted to Paygilant as that encrypted engram. So at multiple stages, it's not just at the transaction that we are seeing a differentiation, even though we are because of the behavioral mapping. Paygilant is going to be able to pick it up from the device perspective, a location perspective, a user space perspective, the application insights perspective. We'll be able to detect the emulator. We'll be able to detect adversarial machine learning from the system because of the machine type swipes that it's utilizing, and then the transactional anomaly in terms of amount, velocity, number of people that are getting paid at the same time, for example, and this will then result in a combined high risk score. Okay. Another
Okay,
one.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Okay, wrap up, please. Thank you.
Okay. Last one, similar type of situation, except now we've got an attacker simulating an SSID, an open, free public Wi-Fi, and let's say they are transmitting at a higher frequency than the little router that's tucked away in some restaurant, meaning they're able to disassociate people using certain tools from that Wi-Fi, reconnect them, and they now can see that data coming through something like Burp Suite. Okay, Burp Suite is a tool used by cybersecurity professionals and attackers, for that matter, to be able to identify information that is going between systems. They may combine that with several others, but in this case, what's happening is that they are hijacking the session ID, okay, and they are then using an emulator-based system with a browser to inject information. So let's say they've got another machine that's got a virtual installation of Windows, a browser open, for example, and they're now injecting that information into that session through Burp Suite. What they're able to do here is to initiate that fraudulent transaction into multiple mule accounts. Same thing is going to come up, right? Device DNA and user space discrepancy, adversarial machine detection coming in. There's no biomarkers. The activity map is different. The behavioral transaction is different. We're able to identify the emulator in real time. And because we've now got multiple devices using the same session ID, okay, with differentiated behaviors, it's going to come back with an extremely high risk score, okay? And because the attacker is, even though they've hijacked the session and they're the man in the middle, they're not able to affect what's happening in the bank from the bank receiving Pagilant's risk score and then automating their actions. Okay, so I'm going to stop it there. Other than to say, I'm happy to take any questions now. If you feel like you want to have a separate session to discuss this in more detail, I'm also happy to do that. I will be in Nigeria next week for the next 2 weeks. So please, by all means, reach out via Toheeb. Thanks, Toheeb.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jon. We'll take the question now, and we'll ask for 1 or 2 sentences from you to wrap up. Let's go straight to the questions. Then we'll come back to you, Jon. So over to you, Akeem. Let's have the questions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Jon, for that incisive presentation. Okay, so part of the questions that we have here, I'll read it out. So, Jon, you'll be able to help us identify and provide a quick answer to it.
Okay.
The first question is saying, how do you ensure unique device identities on web browsers? I think Jon has answered this, but Jon, do you have any addition you want to add to this? You've spoken about the fingerprinting and the likes. Do you want to add 1 or 2 other things?
Sure. I mean, so the device DNA and the user space come into play, right? Now, from a browser perspective, the SDK is embedded in the browser. So let's say it's a Java web snippet. It's going to get cookies, it's going to get history, it's going to get user agent information, it's going to get browser information, it may get device information as well. So for example, on a Windows machine, You may then be able to identify the machine name, the motherboard type, for example, how much RAM is available, etc., etc. So it may not be as comprehensive, for example, as a mobile device, but it would certainly have the device DNA, would be multiple or many components. And again, if you are continuously using your own machine, then what is an attacker or fraudster's machine going to look like? They're generally not using hardware-based devices. They're using software-based devices and emulators. They may also be using things like incognito mode. They may be using Tor adapters and onion networks in order to route the traffic, etc. And Paygilant is able to identify all of those as well. And what their profile would look like versus your profile would look like would be very, very different.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you, Jon.
John. Thank you, John. So
Akeem, go
the
ahead,
second
please.
question says that do we have like an API or a .exe from Paygilant that would be installed on all our applications to monitor or detect these fraudulent external activities? Did you get that, John?
Yes, I did. So if you allow me to share my screen again quickly, I'll bring up the architecture. So this is an example of the architecture, right? So in this case, we've got, let's say, personal internet banking, okay? Inside personal internet banking, you're going to have an SDK or a Java web snippet. That will contain an API that will connect back to Paygilant, okay? And it will send all of those 6 intelligence set information back to Paygilant asynchronously. Now, I'm not going to go into the full flow, but ultimately, we will have a point of information gathering and metadata generation and gathering on the actual device itself by the SDK. And then on the back end, when that application is speaking, for example, to the web application server, right, for, let's say, retail internet banking, then that server is going to be connected in the back end to Paygilant through another API, which is a RESTful API. Okay, so there's actually 2 APIs that get called. One gets used by the SDK to receive, for example, the session ID back here and to send those encrypted engrams with the metadata that's generated to Paygilant prior to the session data coming through from the back end into the Paygilant server itself for the combined analysis.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John. Okay, so the very last one on the chat box from Akinyele Samuel says, can Paygilant be integrated into the system, into current system, financial architecture along without having disrupt the way the current system works? Okay, I think, let me rephrase it very well. I think he's trying to ask if what they have currently, the current system they have, can it be integrated into it without disrupting? For example, he's talking about FlutterWave, which I believe is a payment solution he's talking about.
How Paygilant can integrate with FlutterWave, for example.
Okay, so from my understanding, FlutterWave is you're going to be able to send money, or it will provide, let's say, a payment gateway. It might be some sort of switching structure, etc. So it's I think, a payment platform or payment infrastructure for global merchants. It's not going to influence the flow of data for the actual payment system itself. What it will do is, at the point where your decision is being made, you need to then take action and automate the result from Paygilant. So although you're not changing the information coming in for the transaction to be effected, what you're doing is you're putting additional steps in there to identify what the risk result is, right? And then decisioning on that risk result, and then allowing your core banking application or the application server where maybe the decision is being made to then effect the action. And the same action would be taken as if you are denying a payment because there isn't sufficient funds in that instrument, you would be calling exactly the same function for your automation of the Paygilant decision. Again, Paygilant doesn't sit in line. It is only an information system. You send the data to Paygilant, you get a risk response back, you then automate based on that risk response. So it's not going to change the way that you do things. It will, however, add a decision step in the back end, specifically for automation purposes.
Thank you, John. I'm not sure I really have addition to your answer that you said it all. Okay, so I think that's just all we have for now, basically. It's just about 3 questions. I don't know if we have more time and if anybody is trying to type 1 or more 2 questions. Is it okay to take one more?
If you have further questions, let us know. So for now, I think we can summarize and talk about next steps. Then I'll let John wrap up with 1 or 2 sentences to close out the webinar. So when we started, we spoke about the challenges in the industry that has to do with identity manipulation, that has to do with real-time payment exploitation. We talked about synthetic identities. We spoke about fragmented detection systems within our existing organization or in the industry. We spoke about digital identity and crypto laundering. And we now see that from John's presentation, how he has covered and how Paygilant is providing enterprise financial management solution across board, covering all channels, preventing new account fraud, account takeover, transaction and application fraud, synthetic identity fraud, internal fraud, and most importantly, SIM swap or SIM clone fraud. Okay, having said this, I believe for all the participants, FPG and our partner Cybersecurity and Paygilant will be available to for your RFIs, request for information. We'll be able to share more information about the solution, data sheets, white paper. We can also help you with business cases if you want to present this to your management. Aside this, we'll also be available for further presentation, focus group discussion, workshop, and finally we'll be available to do demo, POVs, and possible POCs or proof of concepts. I think with that, if there's no further questions, we can wrap up and close the session. John, do you have 1 or 2 sentences you want to say before we close out?
Yes, thank you. So firstly, thank you to the audience for attending. I know that what I said was a lot of information in a very short amount of time. I'd like to underscore what Toheeb has said, is that we are happy to come and have a more personalized discussion, showcase the system to you, for example, and to discuss your business challenges that you may have. One last point, as far as customers are concerned, Pagilant's integration with your environment, your applications, your core banking, etc., is seamless. Your customers do not know that there's a fraud solution in place. The fraudsters don't know that there's a fraud solution in place. And that gives you another tool in your quiver, another arrow in your quiver to be able to take the fight to them, right? Instead of just reacting. That said, thank you very much from me. I see that Malachi has a question. I think the chat's turned off, so if you
the chat, can we turn on the chat again, or just permit only Malachi to ask a question? Dennis, can we do that? Enable Malachi to ask a question. Unmute his mic.
Yes.
Please quick, do that quickly. So Malachi, go ahead, please.
You can put the message in the chat. I turned on the chat. Okay.
Malachi, you can turn on your mic and you can speak.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Okay, Mr. John, I was going to ask, you talked about biomarkers, whereby you use the user's information to track how the person used the device. So now, if, for instance, I need to make a payment, for instance, using a bank app, and I need to use another phone because I lost my phone. And is that going to affect the biomarkers at all?
Okay, so
Did you get my question, please?
yes, I did. I got your question. So your question, just for anyone else that maybe didn't hear it clearly, was, let's say you've locked your SIM card, you've locked your phone, and you need to make a payment, and so you use another device. Well, firstly, biomarkers are biomarkers, right? It's not a biometric verification. So on your phone, as an example, you may have your fingerprint recognition for that app enabled to log into the application, or maybe to validate you are who you are. But on the other device, you're not going to have that set up, right? And likely that person is not going to allow you to do it. Let's say it's a friend that lends their phone to you. That said, a biomarker is not a biometric verification. So when you are pushing on the device and you are typing, as an example, you're going to be typing with a similar type of pressure that you would with your own device. Because pressure is defined in kilopascals in this case, you're going to have a very similar type of kilopascal pressure that you press on the device. It doesn't have to be the same device. I have two phones. I have an Apple device and an Android device, and I use them at the same time, or different days, for example, and it's able to differentiate that for me just based on biomarkers. Again, the app insights, the way that you use the banking app, regardless of the device, is also going to be similar because it's relating to you as the human. It's not relating to the device. Okay? The amount of time that it takes you to make a payment versus a fraudster making that payment is going to be very different. There will, however, be an increased risk, right? Because it will be a brand new device that may or may not have been enrolled. Let's say your friend also has let's say this is a Union Bank account, right, that you're using. And he also has a Union Bank account and uses the same device. It's going to identify that there is one device between two users, okay? And we'll also then be able to identify that the biomarkers on the previous device are now being used with a new device, and it'll be able to cross-reference that because of the public profiling, not just the private profiling. And that's a big differentiator for Paygilant. Okay. So in this case, I would think that it would put it at the higher end of the low risk rating. Again, it's going to depend on things like, are you paying the person that you've paid before? Is it a new person? What's the velocity and value of the transactions? There's many things that come into play.
Thank you, John. And to corroborate your point, a lot of behavioral analysis will go into play. Are you right-handed? Are you left-handed? Geolocation, among others. But, during a proof of value or a proof of concept, we'll be able to demonstrate this. I see that we have another hand on. I don't know whether we can take that because we are running out of time. And apologies, everyone. We have to turn off camera and mic, for security reasons, to avoid issues during the webinar. And I believe that if you have further questions, you can reach out to our sales team. I believe Ellen is on the call, Florence is on the call, Chiamaka is on the call, Akeem, Adeola is also on the call. So you can reach out to respective account managers, and we will schedule a focus group discussion with you. We can do a full flag presentation or workshop with you to address your questions and concerns, and we can share further information with you. With this, we would like to close out the session. Thank you for your audience. Thank you for your time to join. And if you need the recorded session, you can also make that request, and we will share the recorded session with you. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time. God bless you, and have a great day ahead.